unique in this surah. Before we go into the laws of inheritance, with anything regarding to law in Islam, we need to know the sources of law. Where do we derive our law from? Because without understanding the sources, we may confuse between the source of law and the law itself. What I mean is that sometimes people tend to think that, oh, it is in the Quran, that means it is law. It is in the Sunnah, that means it is law. Is it law yet, or is it the source of law? Alright, so what are the agreed upon sources of law? At least I know at least 3 people in this class should be able to answer that. So our sources of law that is not disputed, agreed upon by all Muslims is Al-Quran. Second? Sunnah. Third? Ijma. What is ijma? Consensus. Consensus of scholars. Because consensus of lay people do not count. So the consensus of the majority, the consensus of the lay people may be that Coca-Cola is better than Pepsi. It doesn't have any bearing into Islamic law because the consensus of the lay people do not count. Unless all the scholars agree that Coca-Cola is better than Pepsi, then it's a different matter. Alright, after ijma? Qiyas. What is qiyas? Analogical reasoning. What is analogical reasoning? What is analogical reasoning? So, for instance, do we have the prohibition of drugs in the Quran? Methamphetamine, for instance. Is it mentioned in the Quran?
No.
Is it not mentioned? So that is a new case. So you have a new case. This is going to be meth. What is the ruling of meth? What is the ruling of consumption of meth? How do you know it's haram? So we find, is there something, what is bad about meth? Is there something in the Quran or in the sources of law that mention about the prohibition of something else that has similar effect to meth? So it is going to be liquor. Liquor is haram. The question now is, why is liquor haram? Is it because it is fruit? Or is it the color? Or is it intoxication? So we know it's intoxication because there's a hadith where the Prophet said, kullu muskirin khamrun wa kullu khamrin haram. Everything that intoxicates is khamar, and everything that is khamar is haram. Therefore, we know that the reason for the prohibition is intoxication. Anything that intoxicates becomes haram. So we can extend the law of liquor to a new case. This is called analogical reasoning. The challenge with analogical reasoning is finding this. The RD, ratio decidendi. Or in Arabic it's called the illah. Finding the illah is a science in itself. It's, for those few that went through waraqat with me, we've probably seen the confusion of identifying illah. This is a hard job unless it is mentioned specifically in the Quran and the Sunnah. Why are we going through this? Now, we're going through this because everything in Islamic law, not everything in the Islamic law can be found in the Quran. Not everything in the Islamic law can be found in the Sunnah. The Quran and the Sunnah are sources of law. They act as foundation to build the Islamic law on top of it. So Quran and Sunnah, if we want to equate that to modern law, we are talking about constitutional law. It is not the statute law. All the laws that we build on top of constitutional law, Parliament can pass laws, but those laws cannot contravene constitution. When it contravenes the constitution, becomes ultra vires, it is null and void. It cannot be implemented. So the Quran and Sunnah provide that foundation, that guidance. There are things in the Quran and Sunnah that you don't find, and this has been acknowledged even by the Prophet. When Prophet ﷺ sent Sayyidina Mu'adh to Yemen, he asked Mu'adh, how are you going to judge the people? He sent Mu'adh, a companion of the Prophet, to be the judge in Yemen. So he asked Mu'adh, how are you going to judge those people? He said, I am going to judge based on the Quran. And he said, if you don't find anything in the Quran, I'll judge based on your sunnah, your tradition. And if you don't find anything in the tradition, I will judge based on my own reasoning, and I will not go beyond bounds. That means based on his reasoning, bound by the Quran and the sunnah. Now, why didn't he mention ijma? Why didn't he mention ijma?
He was the only judge, maybe?
Yeah?
Maybe he was the only judge.
Because he's still in the times of the Prophet.
The Prophet was still alive. There's no point for people to meet and form a consensus, because any problem they will just meet the Prophet and the Prophet will solve the problem. But Yemen is so far, for him to come all the way to Medina to ask him the ruling, it will be impossible. So he will have to just, based on the Quran, based on the Sunnah, form his own judgment, jump straight to Qiyas. Ijma is formed after the Prophet, during the time of the Sahaba. What is an example of an ijma? Ijma is binding, and we cannot revisit an ijma discussion. What is an example of ijma? The compilation of the Quran. How do we know that the Quran that we have today in our hand is complete? Yeah?
Provenance.
Pardon?
Provenance.
Providence. Okay. But how do we know that there was no mistake that was done during the compilation?
Because there was a group of people. It wasn't just one. There was witnesses, 4 witnesses. Or
True. So what happened was, during the time of the companion Abu Bakr, when it was compiled, everyone agreed that this is the complete Quran. So it formed a consensus of scholars of that time, that what was compiled during the time of Abu Bakr and later on compiled during the time of Uthman is the complete Quran. No one disputed it. It forms ijma. Alright, so now, why are we talking about this? Because the same applies to law of inheritance. Not everything that we do that is part of the inheritance law today can be found in the Quran, can be found in the Sunnah. Sometimes it is found in ijma. Sometimes it is ijtihad, qiyas from scholars to solve a problem that didn't happen during the time of the Prophet and not mentioned in the Quran. The Quran will give us guidance, a guidance of what to do, roughly the principle of justice and so on. But if you happen to have a family structure that is not common, a unique family structure, not mentioned in the Quran, not mentioned in the Hadith, then our scholars have solved this problem through ijma and through qiyas and other sources of law, tools of ijtihad. Okay, because you will see, I hope that answers your question in some degree. Because you will see within the laws of inheritance, because the Quran, based even from the communication between Prophet Muhammad and Mu'adh, it was never intended to be the be all and end all when it comes to fiqh. Because Islam acknowledges that human is dynamic. Community changes. There are different and various types of families. So there will always be room for independent legal reasoning, ijtihad, to find new laws to solve new problems bounded by the principles of the Quran and Sunnah. Alright? Even when it comes to matters of prayers and fasting, for instance. The Prophet tells us when is Dhuhr, when is Asr, when is Maghrib, when is Isha. Alright. So we know fasting, فَأَتِمُوا الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ, fast until night. From فَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. So you fast, you can eat and drink until Fajr time, and you have to fast until Maghrib. You happen to live in the Arctic Circle during summer, and it is Ramadan. What is your fasting hour going to be like? How many hours do you fast?
20 something.
Huh?
20 something.
Some places 23 hours and something minutes. So do we then not eat and drink for 23 hours and 30 minutes? And then that 30 minutes we have to do iftar, we have to pray maghrib, we have to pray isha, we pray tarawih, and then we eat sahur, and then come back to fajr and start fasting. We have to import imams from Indonesia, no? 7 minutes, 20 rak'ats, that's when they become helpful. No, I'm just kidding. So, but the point is, are we bound by that? So our scholars will look into other sources and they say, no, you follow Makkah timings. That means you see Makkah is fasting, let's say Makkah is fasting 17 hours, so you fast 17 hours and you break your fast. Why? How do we come to this conclusion that you look at Egypt Fatwa Council and I think the European Fatwa Council, they differ in opinion whether or not you should fast a maximum of 18 or 19 hours. That means if you live in a country that fasts more than 19 hours or more than 18 hours, you default to Makkah timings. Where do they get 18 and 19? They consult the medical experts of the country. So it's not from the Quran, it is not from the Sunnah, it's the lived reality of the current science. They consult the medical experts in that region, that they say that if you're going to fast for 30 days, it's okay for someone to fast 23 hours for one day. But 23 hours continuously for a month, it is harmful to your health. Therefore, they whatever research they did, the advice was do not exceed 18 or 19 hours of fasting at a time. So this is the fatwa that our scholars have taken, like, alright, the advice they have taken and issued a fatwa saying that if you sunlight is more than 18 or 19 hours, you default to the timings of Makkah. What it shows us is that fiqh is not just bound by this. It takes input from the reality that wherever that we are living in. Of course, this is not for the Tom, Dick and Abdullah to do it. We thought that we will graduate and become mujtahid last night, but unfortunately we didn't.